The desert of Lizara 7 stretched endlessly, a barren wasteland under the pale glow of twin moons. Sandstorms had carved jagged ridges into the ground, and crystalline rocks jutted out like broken teeth. It was here, amidst the desolation, that Cale trudged with weary determination. His boots crunched against the dry soil as he scanned the horizon for anything valuable. Minerals, scrap metal, or perhaps even relics from long-forgotten civilizations. Survival on this moon wasn't easy, but scavenging was all Cale knew. Cale adjusted the strap of his satchel, its contents meager at best. A few tools, some dried rations, and a canteen half filled with water. He paused near a cluster of sharp, translucent stones, their surfaces shimmering faintly in the dim light. As he knelt to inspect them, a sound caught his attention, a soft, irregular noise, almost like breathing. At first, he thought it might be the wind whistling through the rocks, but when the sound came again, weaker this time, he realized it wasn't natural. Curiosity tugged at him, though caution held him back. Scavengers were taught one rule above all others: avoid contact with unknown beings. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, filled with creatures far beyond human comprehension. But something about the frailty of the sound stirred a pang of empathy within him. Against his better judgment, Cale followed the noise, weaving between towering formations until he found its source. There, collapsed behind a jagged rock, lay a figure unlike anything Cale had ever seen. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin glowed faintly, though the light was dull, flickering like a dying flame. Long limbs sprawled awkwardly in the sand, and her large, almond-shaped eyes stared blankly upward, clouded with exhaustion. Thin strands of silvery hair clung to her forehead, damp with sweat. Her body was emaciated, ribs visible beneath her translucent flesh, and her lips cracked and dry. Whatever she was starving and close to death. For a moment, Cale hesitated. Helping her would mean risking his own survival. He didn't know if she was dangerous, or if aiding her would draw unwanted attention. Yet, looking down at her fragile form, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Something in her gaze, despite its weakness, spoke of desperation, of pleading without words. "Damn it," Cale muttered under his breath, crouching beside her. He pulled his canteen from his belt and carefully tipped a small amount of water into her mouth. She swallowed weakly, her throat convulsing as if unused to moisture. Encouraged, Cale gave her more, then tore open a packet of nutrient paste. Scooping a tiny bit onto his finger, he pressed it gently to her lips. She licked it cautiously, her tongue darting out like an animal's, before accepting another bite. As she ate, Cale studied her more closely. Her features were delicate yet alien, with high cheekbones and pointed ears that tapered to fine tips. Most striking were the faint bioluminescent markings etched across her skin, patterns that pulsed weakly, like stars fading at dawn. Whoever, or whatever, she was, she seemed otherworldly, almost ethereal. And yet there was no mistaking the vulnerability in her presence. When she finally managed to lift her head slightly, her luminous eyes locked onto his. There was gratitude there, raw and unspoken, but also a deep sadness that made Cale's chest tighten. Without thinking, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said softly, though he doubted she understood him. She didn't respond, but her trembling eased slightly. Satisfied that she wouldn't collapse again immediately, Cale hoisted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body frail from days, or maybe weeks, of deprivation. Adjusting her weight, he began the slow trek back toward his hovercraft, each step heavy with uncertainty. Who was she? What had brought her to this forsaken place? And why did helping her feel so right? Little did Cale know, this decision would change his life forever. For a brief time, life in the hovercraft felt almost peaceful. Cale and Leora had fallen into a quiet rhythm, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. But peace on Lizara 7 was fragile, as fleeting as the twin moons that cast shifting shadows over the desert. It wasn't long before danger found them. Cale first noticed the signs during one of his routine scavenging trips. The air seemed heavier, charged with an unnatural tension. Tracks in the sand, too large to belong to any native creature, led toward his camp. When he returned to the hovercraft, Leora's markings were dimmer than usual, her body rigid with unease. She stood near the entrance, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon. Without needing words, Cale understood. They weren't alone. That night, the mercenaries arrived. A sleek, black transport ship descended silently from the sky, its engines humming ominously as it hovered above the dunes. Figures clad in dark armor spilled out, armed with advanced weapons and scanning devices. Their leader, a tall human with a scared face and cold, calculating eyes, stepped forward. This was Dragon, a name whispered in fear across the galaxy. He specialized in hunting rare species, extracting whatever made them valuable and discarding the rest. And now his target was Leora. "Found you," Dragon said, his voice carrying over the wind as he activated a loudspeaker. "Hand over the Starweaver, Scavenger, and maybe I'll let you live." Cale clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He glanced at Leora, who stood frozen beside him. Her glow had dimmed further, her posture defensive but resigned. She knew what these people wanted, and what they were willing to do to get it. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm Cale. How could two unarmed individuals possibly stand against such overwhelming odds? "We can't fight them," Cale muttered under his breath. "But we can run." Grabbing a small pack of supplies, Cale ushered Leora toward the back of the hovercraft. They slipped out quietly, disappearing into the labyrinthine caves that honeycombed the desert beneath their feet. The caverns were treacherous, filled with jagged rocks and narrow passages, but they offered cover and a chance to evade pursuit. Behind them, the mercenaries wasted no time. Scanners buzzed as they tracked Leora's fading bioluminescence, while boots crunched against the sand in pursuit. Draken barked orders, his tone sharp and impatient. "She's weakened. Find her before she regains strength." Inside the caves, Cale and Leora moved quickly, navigating by instinct and memory. Cale relied on the orb within him more than ever, its light guiding him through the darkness. Whenever doubt crept in or paths seemed uncertain, the orb pulsed brighter, nudging him toward safer routes. At times, it even warned him of danger ahead, allowing them to avoid ambushes or pitfalls. Leora, too, began contributing. Though still weak, she used her connection to the orb to sense the mercenaries' movements. Her markings flickered erratically when enemies drew near, giving them precious seconds to adjust their course. Together, they formed an unspoken partnership, Cale's resourcefulness complemented by Leora's heightened awareness. Despite their efforts, escape wasn't easy. The mercenaries were relentless, their scanners picking up faint traces of Leora's energy signature. Explosions echoed through the tunnels as they detonated barriers in their path, forcing Cale and Leora deeper into the cave system. Dust filled the air, choking and disorienting, but they pressed on, driven by sheer willpower. At one point, Cale paused to catch his breath, leaning against a damp stone wall. Leora placed a trembling hand on his shoulder, her gaze filled with gratitude, but also guilt. "You shouldn't have helped me," her melodic tones whispered in his mind. "This is my burden, not yours." Cale shook his head firmly. "I chose this. We're in this together." As they continued their desperate flight, Cale couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could keep running. The mercenaries were closing in, their shouts growing louder with every passing minute. But even as fear gnawed at him, the orb inside him burned brighter, fueling his determination. Whatever happened next, he vowed to protect Leora, to repay the trust she had placed in him. Little did he know, the hardest part of their journey was yet to come. Trapped in the labyrinthine caves beneath Lizera 7, Cale and Leora found themselves pushed to their limits. The air grew colder as they descended deeper into the earth, the only light coming from Leora's faintly glowing markings and the occasional shimmer of crystals embedded in the walls. Their pursuers were relentless, their heavy boots echoing through the tunnels like a death knell. Each step felt heavier than the last, but neither Cale nor Leora dared slow down. Survival depended on staying one step ahead and trusting each other completely. As they navigated the twisting passages, Cale noticed subtle changes in Leora. Her strength was returning bit by bit, her bioluminescent patterns growing brighter with every passing hour. It wasn't just physical recovery. She seemed more confident, more determined. The bond between them had deepened, forged not only by shared danger, but also by quiet moments of vulnerability. During brief rests, Leora would share fragments of her memories through melodic tones that resonated directly in Cale's mind. He saw glimpses of her childhood, a radiant world bathed in starlight, where laughter echoed among crystalline spires. He felt the warmth of her family's love and the pain of losing them to violence. These visions weren't just stories. They were pieces of her soul, offered freely as a way of saying thank you. One night, while hiding in a narrow alcove to avoid detection, Cale finally spoke his thoughts aloud. "You've lost so much," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the distant echoes of pursuit. "How do you keep going?" Leora turned to him, her luminous eyes filled with both sadness and resolve. Through the orb within him, Cale sensed her response before she even began. "Hope is never truly lost," her melody whispered in his mind. "Even in darkness, there are stars waiting to be seen." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Cale had spent years surviving alone, focusing only on himself. But meeting Leora had changed something fundamental inside him. She reminded him that life wasn't just about enduring. It was about connecting, about finding meaning even in the hardest moments. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Their journey through the caves became a test of endurance and trust. The mercenaries were closing in, their scanners picking up faint traces of Leora's energy despite her efforts to suppress it. At one point, Cale and Leora were forced to cross a precarious ledge overlooking a bottomless chasm. The path was narrow, slick with moisture, and lined with jagged rocks. One misstep could send them plummeting into the abyss below. Cale went first, carefully testing each foothold before moving forward. When it was Leora's turn, she hesitated, her fear evident in the dimming of her glow. Sensing her anxiety, Cale reached out his hand. "I won't let you fall," he promised. With trembling steps, Leora followed, guided by Cale's steady voice and the reassuring pulse of the orb within him. By the time they reached solid ground, both were breathing heavily, but alive. That moment solidified their partnership. They weren't just two individuals fighting for survival. They were a team, bound by mutual trust and determination. Later, as they rested in a cavern illuminated by glowing crystals, Leora placed her hand over Cale's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of the orb's light. "You carry my gift well," she said through her melodies. "It grows stronger because of your courage." Cale nodded, though he still didn't fully understand the orb's power. What he did know was that it connected him to Leora in ways he couldn't explain. It heightened his instincts, allowing him to sense dangers before they appeared, and gave him flashes of clarity when decisions needed to be made quickly. More importantly, it reminded him why he couldn't give up, not while Leora still needed him. The next morning, they reached a massive underground chamber filled with towering stalactites and pools of shimmering water. It was beautiful but treacherous, with hidden pitfalls and unstable terrain. As they prepared to cross, the sound of approaching footsteps froze them in place. Dragon and his men had caught up. Cornered and outnumbered, Cale and Leora exchanged a glance. There was no running left, only standing their ground. With the orb burning brightly within him, Cale stepped forward, ready to fight alongside Leora. Together, they would face whatever came next, for each other, and for the hope they refused to abandon. Back at his makeshift camp, Kale laid the alien woman down on a patchwork blanket inside his hovercraft. The vehicle wasn't much, a rusted hunk of metal with mismatched parts and flickering lights, but it provided shelter from the harsh elements of Lizera 7. He rummaged through his supplies, pulling out what little food and water he had left. Every movement felt deliberate, careful not to startle her, though she seemed too weak to pose any threat. Kale couldn't shake the unease that came with caring for an unknown being. The woman, whom Kale decided to call Leora, inspired by the faint glow still clinging to her skin like starlight, was barely conscious. Her breathing was shallow but steady now, thanks to the water and nutrients he'd given her earlier. As he tended to her, Kale noticed how her bioluminescent markings pulsed faintly whenever she moved, as if trying to hold on to life itself. It was mesmerizing yet heartbreaking, a reminder of just how fragile she was. Days passed in silence. Leora slowly regained some strength, though progress was slow. She ate sparingly, savoring each bite of nutrient paste as though it were a feast. At first, she avoided eye contact, flinching whenever Kale got too close. But over time, her fear softened. She began watching him with those large, luminous eyes, studying his every move. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she would reach out tentatively, her fingers brushing against the edge of the blanket or the rim of the canteen he handed her. These small gestures spoke volumes. They were signs of trust beginning to form. Kale tried speaking to her often, even though he doubted she understood. "You're safe here," he repeated softly one evening as they sat together under the dim light of the twin moons streaming through the cracked windshield. "I won't hurt you." His voice was calm, steady, meant to reassure more than communicate. To his surprise, Leora tilted her head slightly, as if listening intently. Then, without warning, she raised a trembling hand and placed it over his own. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt through Kale. For the first time since finding her, he felt a connection, not just pity or obligation, but something deeper. Despite their growing bond, Leora remained silent. No words escaped her lips, no sounds broke the quiet nights they shared. Yet there was a sense that she wanted to say something, that words alone wouldn't suffice. One night, as they rested beneath the stars visible through gaps in the hovercraft's roof, Kale finally asked the question burning in his mind. "Who are you?" He whispered, knowing she likely couldn't understand. "What happened to you?" To his astonishment, Leora responded, not with speech, but with music. A soft, melodic tone filled the air, resonating directly in Cal's mind rather than his ears. It wasn't language as he knew it. Instead, it was a cascade of emotions and images, fleeting glimpses into her past. He saw flashes of a radiant world bathed in starlight, towering spires made of crystal, and beings with glowing skin moving gracefully among them. Then, darkness. Chaos erupted. Shouts, explosions, screams. Shadows chased after these luminous figures, capturing them, tearing them apart. Finally, isolation, loneliness, hunger. When the vision faded, Kale found himself staring at Leora, his heart pounding. Tears glistened in her eyes, and her markings pulsed brighter for a moment before dimming again. Without needing words, he understood enough. Her people had been hunted, persecuted for reasons he couldn't yet grasp. She had fled, only to end up stranded on this barren moon, starving and alone. "I'm sorry," Kale murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll help you. I promise." Leora didn't respond verbally, but her hand found his once more, squeezing it gently. In that moment, Kale realized that trust wasn't built through words. It was forged through actions. And while he still didn't know where this journey would lead, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't turn away now. Not after seeing the pain etched into her soul, the hope flickering faintly like the last embers of a dying fire. As the nights grew colder and the desert winds howled outside, Kale continued nursing Leora back to health. Little did he know, her gratitude would soon take a form neither of them could have anticipated. and change both their lives forever. As Leora regained her strength, Cal noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. Her bioluminescent markings grew brighter, pulsing with a steady rhythm that seemed to mirror her recovery. She began moving more freely, testing her limbs as if rediscovering their purpose. Though she still didn't speak aloud, her melodic tones became more frequent, filling the hovercraft with soft, otherworldly harmonies. These sounds weren't random. They carried meaning, emotions, and sometimes even vivid images that resonated directly in Cal's mind. It was as though she were teaching him a new way to communicate, one that transcended language. One evening, under the twin moon's silvery glow, Cal sat cross-legged on the floor while Leora rested nearby. The air inside the hovercraft was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of metal expanding in the cool night. Cal watched as Leora extended her hand toward a flickering light source, a small lantern hanging from the ceiling. To his astonishment, the light responded to her touch, bending and twisting until it formed intricate patterns in the air. Swirls of golden energy danced around her fingers before dissipating into nothingness. What are you?" Cal whispered, his voice tinged with awe. Leora turned to him, her luminous eyes locking onto his. For the first time, she offered an explanation, not through visions or melodies, but through fragmented thoughts projected directly into his mind. He saw flashes of her people, the Velari*, who lived in harmony with the stars themselves. They called themselves Starweavers, beings capable of channeling cosmic energy through their bodies. This power allowed them to heal wounds, create light, and even manipulate matter. But at great personal cost. Each use drained their vitality, leaving them physically and emotionally exhausted. Cal absorbed the information slowly, piecing together the fragments like a puzzle. "You're saying your people can harness starlight?" he asked hesitantly. Lyra nodded, her expression bittersweet. Through another wave of mental imagery, Cal learned that the Velari believed their gifts were meant to bring balance to the universe. However, their abilities had also made them targets. Mercenaries, driven by greed and fear, sought to exploit their powers for profit and warfare. Entire settlements had been destroyed, families torn apart. Lyra herself had escaped capture only to lose her connection to the stars during her ordeal. Without access to their celestial energy, she had become powerless and nearly perished. Her story left Cal reeling. He couldn't imagine living with such a burden, carrying both extraordinary gifts and unbearable loss. Yet despite everything, Leora radiated resilience. There was no bitterness in her gaze, only determination. When she placed her hand gently on his chest, Cal felt a warmth spread through him, soothing yet electrifying. A shimmering orb materialized beneath his skin, glowing faintly where her palm had touched him. "What is this?" Cal gasped, pressing his hand against his chest. The orb pulsed softly, its light steady and comforting. Through another cascade of thoughts, Leora explained that she had given him a fragment of her inner light, a piece of her essence. It wasn't just a gift, it was a bond, a reminder of the trust she placed in him. The orb would guide him, heightening his instincts and granting glimpses of her memories and emotions. But it came with a warning. The orb was tied to her fate. If harm befell her, the orb would dim and eventually vanish. Cal stared at her, overwhelmed by the weight of her gesture. "Why would you do this? Why give me something so precious?" Lyra's response came not in words, but in a single powerful image, a ripple spreading across water, each wave touching countless shores. She believed every act of kindness created ripples of hope, reaching far beyond what could be seen. By helping her, Cal had set those ripples in motion. And now, she entrusted him with a piece of her soul to carry forward. The realization struck Cal deeply. He hadn't saved her out of obligation or curiosity. He had done it because it felt right. And now, this alien woman, this Starweaver, had chosen to honor that act with an unforgettable gift. As they sat together under the vast expanse of stars, Kale knew their fates were intertwined. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, or not at all. The underground chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, supported by jagged stalactites that gleamed faintly with embedded crystals. Pools of water reflected the dim light, creating an eerie glow that danced across the walls. Kale and Leora stood at the center of it all, their breaths shallow as they listened to the sound of boots crunching on stone. Dragon's mercenaries were close, too close. Kale gripped a jagged piece of rock he picked up earlier, his makeshift weapon feeling woefully inadequate against the mercenaries' advanced firearms. Beside him, Leora's bioluminescent markings flared brighter, pulsing with determination. Her strength had returned significantly, but she was still no match for armed soldiers. Yet there was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. She turned to Kale, her melodic tones resonating softly in his mind. "We can do this together." Dragon entered the chamber first, his scared face twisted into a cruel smirk. Behind him, 6 heavily armed mercenaries fanned out, their weapons trained on Kale and Leora. "Enough running," Dragon said, his voice echoing through the cavern. "Hand her over, scavenger. You've done your part. Now step aside." Kale tightened his grip on the rock, his jaw clenched. "I'm not letting you take her." Dragon chuckled darkly. Brave words for someone so outmatched. He raised a hand, signaling his men to advance. As the mercenaries moved closer, Kale felt the orb within him pulse violently, filling him with a surge of energy. It wasn't just adrenaline. It was something deeper, almost instinctual. The orb guided him, heightening his awareness. He could see paths others couldn't, weak points in the mercenaries' formation, cracks in the cavern floor where rocks might fall, even slight shifts in Leora's posture that signaled what she intended to do next. Without hesitation, Kale acted. He hurled the jagged rock toward a cluster of stalactites above the mercenaries. The impact caused one of the massive formations to break free, crashing down with a thunderous roar. Dust and debris filled the air, disorienting the attackers. Seizing the moment, Kale grabbed Leora's hand and pulled her behind a large boulder for cover. From there, chaos erupted. Leora stepped forward, her glowing markings blazing like miniature suns. With a graceful motion, she extended her hands, and shards of crystalline energy shot outward, striking 2 mercenaries and disabling their weapons. They stumbled back, shielding their faces from the blinding light. Another mercenary fired blindly into the haze, but his shots ricocheted harmlessly off the cavern walls. Kale didn't waste a second. Using the orb's guidance, he darted between cover points, grabbing loose rocks and hurling them with surprising accuracy. One struck a mercenary square in the helmet, knocking him unconscious. Another hit a scanning device, causing it to spark and malfunction. Though outnumbered, Kale and Leora fought as a seamless unit, their movements synchronized by trust and desperation. But Dragon wasn't easily deterred. He shouted orders, rallying his remaining men while drawing a sleek, high-powered rifle from his back. "Enough games," he snarled, aiming directly at Kale. Before he could fire, Leora intervened, unleashing another burst of radiant energy that temporarily blinded everyone in the room, including herself. The chamber descended into confusion, shouts and curses filling the air. In the chaos, Kale spotted an opportunity. A nearby pool of water shimmered unnaturally, hinting at instability beneath its surface. Trusting the orb's intuition, he sprinted toward it, grabbing a fallen mercenary's explosive charge along the way. As Dragon regained his vision and locked onto Leora, Kale planted the charge near the edge of the pool and activated it. "Get down," Kale yelled, pulling Leora to the ground just as the explosion triggered a chain reaction. The cavern floor collapsed, sending chunks of rock and debris tumbling into the depths below. Several mercenaries fell with it, their screams fading into the abyss. Dragon barely managed to leap clear of the collapsing area, landing hard on solid ground. Breathing heavily, Kale and Leora rose to their feet, facing Dragon alone now. His armor was scuffed, his expression livid. "You think this ends here?" He spat, raising his rifle once more. Before he could act, Leora stepped forward, her glow reaching its peak. With a final, powerful surge of energy, she unleashed a wave of light so intense it forced Draken and his surviving men to retreat, shielding their eyes. When the brilliance faded, the chamber was eerily silent, empty except for Kel and Leora. Exhausted but alive, they shared a glance. Their victory was fleeting, but it was enough. For now, the cavern was quiet now, the echoes of battle fading into the stillness. Kale leaned against a jagged rock, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Beside him, Leora stood with her head bowed, her glowing markings dimming slowly. The fight had taken its toll on both of them, physically and emotionally, but they were alive. For a moment, neither spoke, their silence heavy with unspoken gratitude and sorrow. As the dust settled, Kale noticed something strange in the far corner of the chamber. Half buried beneath rubble was the unmistakable shape of a spacecraft. An ancient vessel, its surface etched with intricate designs that shimmered faintly even in the dim light. It was unlike anything Kale had ever seen, clearly not of human origin. His heart raced as realization dawned. This was Leora's way home. Leora approached the ship cautiously, her steps hesitant but purposeful. When she touched its hull, the craft responded, glowing softly as if recognizing her presence. A hatch slid open with a low hum, revealing an interior filled with crystalline panels and flowing patterns of light. This was no ordinary ship. It was a relic of her people, left behind for emergencies or desperate journeys. Turning to Kale, Leora's luminous eyes glistened with emotion. Through the orb within him, he felt her thoughts cascade like gentle waves. "This is my chance to return," she said, her melodic tones resonating deeply in his mind. "To find what remains of my kin." Kale nodded, though his throat tightened with an ache he couldn't quite name. "You've earned it," he replied softly. "You deserve to be with your people." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. In that gaze, there were no words needed, only understanding. Kale had saved Leora, but she had saved him too, in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. She had reminded him of hope, of connection, of the beauty in selflessness. And now, she was leaving. Before boarding the ship, Leora stepped closer to Kale. Her hand reached out, resting over his chest, where the orb pulsed steadily. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice blending seamlessly with the melodies in his mind. "Not just for saving me, but for believing in me when I could not believe in myself." Then, without warning, she placed her palm firmly against his chest. A surge of warmth spread through him as the orb flared brightly one last time before fading completely. When Kale looked down, he realized it was gone. But something else remained. Memories of their journey together lingered vividly in his mind, clearer than ever before. He would carry those memories forever, along with the lessons she had taught him. With a final glance, Leora stepped onto the ship. As the hatch closed behind her, Kale watched the vessel rise gracefully into the air, its lights casting shimmering reflections across the cavern walls. Moments later, it vanished into the sky, leaving him alone once more. Standing amidst the ruins of the chamber, Kale felt a profound sense of loss, but also purpose. Leora's gift hadn't disappeared entirely. It lived on in him, shaping who he was becoming. Over the following weeks, he returned to scavenging, but something had changed. Where once he had been driven solely by survival, he now sought opportunities to help others, whether it was sharing supplies with stranded travelers or standing up against injustice when he encountered it. Word of his actions began to spread among the scattered settlements of LEGACIES. People spoke of a scavenger who carried himself differently, whose kindness seemed almost otherworldly. Though Kale never mentioned Leora, he knew her influence was everywhere, in every life he touched, every act of compassion he extended. Years later, under the twin moons of LEGACIES, Kale often gazed at the stars, wondering if Leora was out there somewhere, reunited with her people. He didn't know if he'd ever see her again, but he didn't need to. Her legacy, the ripple effect of her hope and trust, was already etched into the fabric of his existence. And so, Kel continued forward, carrying the light of a star weaver within him. It wasn't just a gift, it was a promise that even in the darkest corners of the universe, hope could shine brightest when shared.